Hi, it's Ed here from Dirt Magazine, and today we're going to do a how-to video on how to true your wheel. A lot of people think it's very complicated, but it's not really. There's a few key things. First of all, the tools you need. The one key one is a spoke key. My personal favourite is a Spokey Pro. Reason being that it grips on all four sides of the spoke. You don't have to worry about pushing it on like some other ones, and because the Spokey Pro's got two things, two metal inserts, it means there's far less chance of rounding off a spoke nipple, particularly an alloy one, and you can simply drop it down onto the nipple and it's just in place there. That's it, simple as. And they're also really cheap, so yeah, brilliant, comfortable to use as well. So the other thing is a wheel truing stand. It's not absolutely essential. You can do it in a bike, just makes it a bit fiddlier. I'll show some photos of how you can sort of rig that up to do that yourself. You can get quite cheap truing stands that are simpler than this one. They're a little bit trickier to use, but they still do the job well, and they're easier than doing it in your bike frame. So yeah, once you've got a spoke key and a truing stand on your bike, you're ready to go. And there are really three key things to think about when truing a wheel. You've got the side-to-side movement, which is what most people think about when they say a wheel's buckled. You've got the up and down movement, so like a flat spot or something like that. And then you've also got the dishing, which is where the rim is in relation to the hub body. And pretty much on all bikes, really, you have the rim in the center of the hub. And that means that, for example, on this rear hub, the spokes on this side are actually much flatter when you look down the wheel than this side, and they're also much tighter. And talking of tightness of spokes, before you start truing the wheel, it's really good to go round and just feel all the spokes on the wheel and just check that there aren't any that are really loose. Because if they are, you sort of maybe want to nip them up a little bit so they're not crazy loose straight away before you start. It could be a sign that you've got a really bad flat spot or a really bad bend, but we'll talk about that in a minute. The one thing people tend to do when they're starting out trying to true a wheel is they tend to only think about the side-to-side movement at one time, and then maybe they might then go and try and deal with the up and down. But ideally you want to concentrate on both of them at the same time. So for example here, when I spin the wheel, I can see that it is moving over to this side quite a lot there, but it's also coming down. So basically there's two ways of moving the wheel to the other side. I could either loosen the spoke on this side, or I could tighten the ones on this side. Now if I was to loosen this, it would actually make that down movement even worse. So what I want to do instead is I want to tighten the ones on the other side. Now I'm just moving it slowly so that I can see where the buckle is between the spokes, and it's really between these two. So what you do is put the spoke on, and when you're tightening, basically if you're looking down the spoke, you're turning the spoke key anti-clockwise to tighten it, and you only have to do a little bit and you'll start to see the wheel move. And then I'll go to the other one, which I think is responsible, and do a little bit on that, and we will see that it's now moved quite a lot. It's still obviously out, but it's better than it was. So basically the key is little bits often. We've still got a bit there where it's quite low, but it's actually, if we move the jaws in, we can then get to see a better idea of where we are. So basically keep moving the guides in and you can see where you are. So on this one, for example, we can tighten that side. And when you're tightening, what you'll quite often feel is that when you move the spoke key, you should be able to feel that at first you tend to wind up the spoke rather than the actual nipple tightening up the spoke. So you'll feel it twist, and then you'll suddenly feel a nipple give, and that's when it's tightening or loosening. Now ideally you want to then you want to back off the spoke, take the wind up out of the spoke so that the spoke's not twisted. So basically when I turn it, I can feel it go, and then it tightens a little bit, and then if I just go like that, I can feel the spoke unwind, but the nipple not, so it's leaving it. So that means that it should help with the trueness. And also, when you've finished truing it, getting it perfect, it's good to go around, give all the spokes a squeeze like this with your hands, and that will again help the spokes unwind and all settle into their places. And also when you're doing this, you'll also feel if you've got any really loose spokes again. So that's more at the end, but it's good to do it at several stages, particularly if you've got a really badly buckled wheel. Keep doing it regularly. And then there is obviously a limit to how badly buckled a wheel can be and you still true it. So for example, if you've got a rim where it's really badly coming out this way in one section, but then straight after it it's really coming out this way, there is realistically very little chance of being able to true that. It's such a sharp bend and you just cannot put enough tension through the spokes to pull that right again. With disc brakes it's not so much of a problem in a way, because if you haven't got the money for a new rim or anything like that, the crucial thing is to get some good tension, good even tension, as even as you can, into the wheel, and then your wheel should hopefully still be strong, although it won't be straight. You don't have to worry about it rubbing on your brakes, V-brakes or whatever, because you've got a disc brake. So it's more in that case about getting good strength. And the same goes for a flat spot. If you've really hit your rim hard here and it's coming right up, it doesn't really matter how much you try and squeeze the rest of the wheel to push that out again, you won't succeed. There are some tools that are out, there are not many of them, not many shops have them, that can push a rim out, but it's not really that advisable, because on an aluminium rim particularly, it's so weakened anyway. You might as well just try and make it as strong as you can and forget about a flat spot, and when you got the money, buy a new rim. So yeah, basically I suppose the key things of truing are taking it slowly, looking at exactly what's happening. You'll see, because sometimes people when they start out, they tend to forget what they're doing and maybe unwind a spoke when they should be doing it up. But if you constantly keep an eye on what you're doing, you'll see if you're going the wrong way. So for example, if I undo this one too much, the rim will suddenly come across and it'll hit on that side there. So then I can do it back up and bring it back across again. So it's all a balancing act, because the other thing you've got to remember is that when you do one spoke up, it's not just having an effect there. The whole thing is like a balancing act, and it's sharing out the forces across the wheel. So for example, if you were to pull this bit up because it was too low, it would be pushing out the rest of the rim ever so slightly. You know, it's all being, something's got to give somewhere else for that to move. So yeah, I would say just go slowly, concentrate on what you're doing, and the key thing I think is to remember to think about the up and down at the same time as the side to side. Always keep an eye that you haven't got any really slack spokes. Try and get them nipped up a bit so they're similar tension, and then see if the wheel's miles out or anything, and try and deal with it then. But ideally you don't want any spokes like flapping about in the wind. So the final thing is the dishing of the wheel, and the dishing is where the rim is in relation to the outside edges of the hub. And on pretty much all forks and frames, the rim should be in the centre of these edges. Now on a front hub, for example, you've got a disc brake mount on one side and nothing on the other, so it's obviously the spokes aren't totally even, and you should be able to see on here that the spokes are much steeper on this side and much more out of an angle on that side, and that's because these spokes here are much looser than they are on that side. So that's how you achieve the dishing, is by having different tension in one side to the other. And ideally for a full strength wheel you'd have zero dish, and that's part of the reason why you have 150mm rear hubs, is to try and get those flanges wider apart, because basically on this side with the spokes at more of an angle, that gives a stronger wheel, whereas more vertical spokes give a weaker wheel. So if I take the wheel out of the stand, this is what's called a dishing tool, and you can put it on the rim like this. Ideally your rim needs to be true, or you have to do it in several points. You basically pull this marker up like that, rest it on there, and then you put it to the flat. So that's set there, so I know that rim is that distance from that end. And then I have to turn the wheel over, and it should be the same, which this one is. Basically spot on, this one, the dishing. You can do this if you don't want to buy a dishing tool. They're not that expensive. There are two other options really. One way I've done it at home before is you get 2 blocks of wood. They need to be fairly deep because they need to get higher than that point there. You get 2 blocks of wood, same thickness, you lie them on there, another block across, and then you can use a ruler to literally measure down to that cap there and check the distance, and then do the same on the other side and check it's the same. The other way you can do it is to put it back in your bike and to measure the distance between the rim and the frame or the fork leg on one side. Say do it always on the non-drive side, it's up to you which side you do it. Then turn the wheel around, so fit the wheel in the frame the wrong way round, and then measure that distance on the same side again, and it should be the same. If it's not, then the rim needs to be moved the other way. Okay, so there's a couple of ways of measuring that. But if your dishing's not quite right, one, your bike won't track quite rightly, and the other thing is you're more likely to have problems with tyre rub on your frame and things like that, because nothing's straight, it's too much over one side. So I think that's really it really. It's basically just a case of tightening and loosening spokes, doing a little bit at a time, don't go crazy. Make sure that you might have a really sharp buckle, for example, that's just in sort of one confined spot like this, and in that case you probably only want to be working on sort of these 3 spokes. But you might have a much bigger buckle that comes, say, over a whole area, so you want to share all the work over the spokes. You don't want to be trying to yank this, do it all on this one, for example, because you'll end up with this one too far over this way and then a load of them still too far that way. So you just need to keep an eye on the length of the buckle, do little bits on each spoke, and go from there really. So I hope that's helped you work out how to true your wheel, and just remember to try not to wind up the spokes too much. Yeah, that's it.